Row crop farmers, farmland owners, and beginning farmers are increasingly curious about soil health. Integrating grazing ruminants ramps up soil health, and the feed value of cover crops can often offset the added cost of planting them. Livestock can also utilize a small grain in rotation or perennials planted on more marginal row crop fields. This video is one in a series through the Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Agriculture's Endowed Chair in Agricultural Systems. Eric and Amanda Volsen, their 4 children, and Eric's father raise corn, soybeans, small grains, and cattle on their farm in Minnesota's Blue Earth River watershed. Amanda is also a registered nurse serving the area. Reduced tillage, cover crops, and grazing cattle on the 150 acres of owned and family-rented land around the farmstead build soil health. The 6th-generation farm includes other rented fields. Eric describes the family roles, diversifying with small grains and cover crops, integrating grazing cattle and the benefits they observe, and what landlords could do to make it possible for more farmers to integrate cattle on rented land.
Perfect. Well, we got primarily corn and soybean operation here near Walters. I farm with my father and my wife. My wife Amanda, we've been married almost 10 years now. One of the first years we were married, I needed the grain cart on the other end of the field, so I asked her to take it down there. And after that, she kind of caught the itch, I would say. She's my #1 grain cart driver in the fall. She's my bookkeeper, keeping me in track, and she does a very good job at that. She's using the cattle to her advantage through photography and some of the other aspects. She's often the one out there checking on them too.
What prompted you to get started on the soil health journey and integrate grazing cattle into your cropping system?
Seeing guys planting green, I heard about cover crops for a long time, but you know, with being so far north, never really considered it. I think that's a lot of guys in the area. But I attended my first meeting via a buddy. He said, "Hey, just come check it out, listen." And I went to the meeting, kind of heard what I was wanting to do, just didn't really know that's how I wanted to do it. The mono or two crop rotation isn't really a crop rotation. Wanting to get a little diversity and going back to getting that 3rd crop in the rotation, I have implemented a type of small grain of some sort every year for the last 3. I've always liked cattle. Growing up through high school, bring a few calves home here and there. About 15 years ago, I decided that I kind of wanted to try the cow-calf breeding aspect of it, and kind of grew it enough to where I had raising my own young stock, raising them up, and we're butchering them for local processing. And it got to the point where I was getting too big to have more than just a few head eating round bales every day, all through the season on a dry lot. And through this soil health journey, realizing that that's going to help my cropland and grow my cattle herd and allow me to have a healthier and larger herd locally here without having to rent pasture. Pasture's a fairly high commodity around here because there's very little of it, and being able to graze my cropland, now I'm able to keep the cattle on my home farm and utilize the cover crop and build the soil health. Right now I'm temporarily doing temporary fence. I've been doing a 2-strand poly wire with step-in posts and T-posts in the corners. That's been working really well so far. I probably am going to continue that, but I'm currently looking into putting a permanent fence all the way around the perimeter of this home farm, and then possibly splitting it into quarters.
How does grazing cattle on your fields help pencil out small grains and reduce drylot costs?
I would say they're flexible. I was able to start raising cattle at a younger age because it's something easy to get into. Now that I'm more established in the row crop and the small grain operation, it's easier to pencil out a small grain crop with the cattle in that operation. We're putting a cocktail mix of 10 to 15 seeds, up to 20 maybe, in after the oats, and growing that up and trying to graze that in the fall. That's putting the soil health back initially green with diversity in the plants, and then having the cattle go over that same acre, providing feed for them and recycling nutrients on that acre for that purpose. I can cash flow a small grain crop easier over a 2 or 3 year span versus just looking at that first year. I would say it's much easier to pencil it out by putting the cattle in the field versus a dry lot. Right now the chores are minimal. Putting up the fence was the biggest amount of work. I get my family and kids to help with that. We string fence after the crop's off, and then they most of the time take care of themselves. We still have to do daily chores and check fence.
What benefits have you observed after integrating grazing cattle into your row crop operation?
Well, just this last year, it'd be the 4th year I've had cattle out in the field. We did soil testing before I started with the cattle, and just this year it was back in the rotation to be soil tested. We got the soil test back, and I was kind of amazed what I would consider good ground of that part of the field. The yield was less. It should have been better on a dry year, and it wasn't. Where I had fed the cattle across the tops of the hills, bale grazed, and they naturally spread their manure out, and I had the compost of the manure and the bale grazing there. Those acres, they yielded better. They had better nutrient values in their soil tests in the grids and the zones, and I saw it from the combine seat. I had to leave the cattle out 1 year longer than I would have liked to for feeding purposes because we were short hay that year, and they did well out there, and I felt like they ripped the field up, and I thought I ruined it, but that fall that was the best field on our operation. On this field behind me here, it would have been 3 years ago, 3 crops ago. It was corn. Mid to late September we had a stiff storm come through, and several of the varieties snapped or broke over. They tangled up or lodged, and through the combine we figured we were losing 20 to 30 bushel an acre on the ground just because we couldn't pick it up. This field, it's split between mine and my dad's, and that was one of the first years that I had temporarily fenced it and grazed it, and I put the fence perimeter on my portion of the field, and we left his just for management purposes. And that next spring and through the next summer, we could see that the cattle had done a very good job of picking up the corn that the combine couldn't get. I put my feed wagon out with feed in it, and it was 3-4 weeks before they really needed it.
How could landlords help you graze cattle on rented fields?
So far, I've been fortunate enough to keep the cattle on either owned or family rented land. I have not ventured out past that, but that's basically been logistics, not getting the cattle too far away from home. If I had that opportunity, I think I would definitely be talking with some landlords about doing that. I think the landlords maybe want to see some animals back on the land, but maybe not temporary or permanent. And the way we're doing things these days, we can do either with temporary fence or permanent fence. But basically kind of getting somewhat of an interest and a commitment from those landlords to say, hey, we want to do this, and maybe look a little bit more long-term than just a year out.